Hello, good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here at such early hours in the deep winter and just before the end of year break. My name is Marion Janssen. I'm the Chief Economist of the International Trade Center, and I will be the moderator of this session titled Data and Trade, Identifying Win-Win Solutions for Future Digital Commerce. At ITC, we are active in the area of technical assistance, trade-related technical assistance. When it comes to the digital world, we notably assist companies to start working online, to conduct e-commerce. We also assist governments in designing what we call e-strategies. That can be ICT strategies, VPO strategies, e-commerce strategies. So we are therefore not active in the area of policy design directly, but many of our clients would like to understand how to think about policies around around digital trade and digital technologies. So I'm here to moderate and to learn from our distinguished participants about this important topic. I would like to learn how important this topic really is. I'm reading, and we are reading everywhere, that data is the new oil of the world. Without data, nothing can happen anymore. We are being told data have to flow freely in order for this oil to be functioning. On the other hand, we would like to understand, we as consumers and also as also our clients, many companies, what is going to happen with this data, how protected are they, and we would like to understand what are the trade-offs between this. Everything should ideally be free, but on the other hand, we need to find protection. Trade-offs are typically often difficult to design, often difficult to define. In Geneva, we have an organization called the World Trade Organization. I worked for that organization many years, and have been exposed to the difficulty of finding win-win answers, of finding the right balance between protecting only to the extent as necessary to protect, but while allowing for free flows and free trade. So I am very curious to understand how our panelists are thinking about this topic in the context of data and trade. I will just shortly introduce the speakers in the order in which we have agreed that they will intervene. We'll have on my right Adam Schlosser, Project Lead for Digital Trade and Cross-Border Data Flows at the World Economic Forum. I will ask Adam later on to make the first intervention. To my left, Jovan Kurbalija, Founding Director of the Diplo Foundation, based here in Geneva, and a key player around everything that is digital in this region. Tjørbon Frederiksen, ICT Analysis Section and Chief ICT Analysis Section at the UNCTAD, and a key player in the E-Trade for All initiative at the UNCTAD. To my right, Luzewies van der Laan of the Netherlands, former Dutch and European parliamentarian and a member of the board of ICANN. And then further to my right, Satrio Bramono, first secretary of the permanent mission of Indonesia. We are imagining a flow of the following type, where Adam and Jovan start by setting a bit the general stage of what are the issues, how are they being addressed at a global, at a general level. Tjørbon Frederiksen, I expect, will give some more insights into how the UNCTAD is approaching the challenges that we have raised in this introduction. And then Luzewies and Satrio, I look forward. I told Luzewies, you are the people who are supposed to then define the solutions and potentially implement them. So I very much look forward to your fourth and fifth intervention. Each of you has 5 minutes for a first statement, and then we go in rounds of questions and answers, notably, potentially also with an audience that is following us online. So please, Adam, the floor is yours.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for including me in this exciting discussion. And I'm glad looking at the title of the session that it's deemed a win-win, because good data policies will truly produce multiple winners. And we could actually add more wins to that. So it's whether it's industry, government, consumers, civil society, there could easily be winners all around. It's not just a zero-sum or win-loss type of game. And when talking about trade and digital trade, we're thinking of it's not just going online and buying something, it's also business to business. That's one of the biggest aspects of digital trade as well, because now companies that are traditionally thought of as internet or data companies are not the only ones online. It's every single company across every single sector. All trade now has a digital component. So containers are not just things that bring your goods, it's also the vehicle by which code is transferred and shipped. So it has multiple meanings now. And last year, cross-border data flows added the equivalent of the GDP of France to the global economy. And that's not just replacing something that was previously analog, it's completely new economic generation. So it just shows you how much value is being created from the ability to move, process, use, and store data globally. So in the space of trade agreements, it's important to note that while trade agreements can create and provide boundaries and guardrails for issues related to data and create collaborative norms and best practices, they are often not best suited as a primary means to answer concerns. One, they don't move quick enough. So we had a case where there was good language in the TPP and there was potentially good language in TISA, but by the time those agreements are finalized, if they ever are, and by the time they're implemented, and then you go through dispute resolution possibly, if there's a violation, there's going to be a whole new type of technology out there. So in the most overt cases of protectionism, they can do course correcting. For the practical sake, it's not the best vehicle. So it's important to think of other ways to create good data policy and ensure that's in a collaborative manner between governments and civil society and industry as well. So a second key topic that I want to bring up, and this is a bit of a personal crusade, is that data is not the new oil. I know we like to say it and everyone mentions it, but it often leads to misperceptions about how to handle data, that you should hoard it behind your borders and keep it in silos like oil. So there's limitations to that metaphor. So one, data needs to be collected and maintained in a way that's usable to create new analytics and new value. And today, only 10% of all data is usable. So think about that. All this data is being collected and you can't even do anything with it. And at some point, data turns from an asset to a liability, because it could have sensitive information there. It could be a security risk. So it's really important to know why you're collecting data. What do you want to do with it? And ensure that you're doing so in a way that protects the security and privacy of that data. Otherwise, you're just racking up costs without adding to the benefits of it. Second, data is not a finite resource. You can reuse it. You can share it. You can provide it to others. You can do dual analytics. And in fact, in the next 2 years, the world's going to generate about 40 zettabytes of data. And I was trying to come up with a useful framework to explain what that means, and you can. It's so infinite. It's basically like generating 4 million hours of HD video, and it's just really hard to grasp the amount of data that's going to be produced. So it's not a finite resource like oil. A good point of reference is autonomous vehicles will be generating a lot of data in the coming years. And in a scenario where, say, a city or a small city has a fleet of about 100,000 autonomous vehicles, which is fairly realistic. San Francisco is a city now where I live, has 470,000 registered cars. So if 1/4 of them become autonomous in the next 15, 20 years, they'll be generating as much data as all of Twitter is this year. So you can see, imagine that scaled across multiple cities and multiple regions, just the sheer amount of data that's being collected. So it's important to put the frameworks and rules in place that allow it to be shared and used in a productive manner. So getting to the topic of SMEs, how can SMEs be helped by data? So there's the obvious use cases that you could all think of, the tracking and acquiring customers, streamline the management of logistics and production, optimizing relationships. But an underappreciated path for success and development of SMEs is the B2B or the business-to-business angle. So now the phrase is that the sun never sets on business. It used to be the British Empire, but now it's business. It's global. When you're online, you can be reaching customers and conducting business all hours of the day. So that presents a really great advantage for particularly some developing economies in Asia and Africa, because businesses want to have contact points and functions in every time zone. So those small businesses in those regions could be working on back office functions. And while it could be complex analytics, financial analysis is useful, but it's also a great inroads for less developed businesses and less developed economies. So for example, a large multinational law firm that I've worked with in the past works with an SME in the Philippines to format and streamline all their PowerPoint presentations to clients. And it seems like a small function, but it's literally hundreds of thousands of dollars of a contract for a simple function that without a lot of technical capability, without a lot of education, you could do that. So it really shows the opportunities that are out there by working on data and being able to transfer that data globally around the world. In fitting with the title of the session, improved data protection and increased development can go hand in hand. Baseline security and privacy standards are important to create a floor instead of expectations for all actors in the system. But there is a great gap between no rules at all and something as complex as the EU General Data Protection Regulation. And it's important to respect the levels of development and resources availability when developing new data rules. So for example, SMEs without the ability or the sophistication to understand various rules for compliance and GDPR and other complex systems, they're facing a really uphill climb entering new markets. So perhaps an education effort is needed on how to best develop data governance strategies, as well as the importance and benefits of how using data can generate growth. And I'm glad I'm not the one to provide the solutions. I'll just get to give the state of play and highlight some of the issues. So I just want to throw that out there. When you're a large multinational company, you could easily hire 60, 100, 200 lawyers to deal with implementing GDPR. But what if you have 3 people? What if all of them are focused on running your business? What do you do in that scenario? So developed economies can work to create interoperable standards amongst them. So for example, ASEAN's working on digital integration. If they're able to create a standard that allows for data transfers to be done safely in their region, well, that's created a level playing field and potential boost for all the small businesses and all the businesses overall and consumers in that region. And then you could take that standard and bring it to APEC, you could bring it to other jurisdictions, and you could expand from there. So you have a baseline, you have a bunch of parties that are working to set that standard, and then you could grow as you get more sophistication and more resources available overall. Another potential way to help.
Adam,
Yep.
please take your time.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll save my other ways to help.
Oh, sorry. No, I thought you were going
Yeah,
to close slowly.
I'll close out real quickly. I'll throw one other idea out there, and then I'll close quickly. So another way to help SMEs is to incentivize publicly accessible data. So can you create tools that help the private sector actors scrub the proprietary data, and then also have special toolkits with maybe publicly accessible APIs for the SMEs to access that data and create their own analytics. That's another idea to throw out there. So in closing, sound data policy is one of the best and most important ways to improve data, to improve trade and development. So thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I will pass over the floor to Jovan, but maybe you want to pick up on 3 points you made. You complain about trade agreements being too slow. Indeed, we have been seeing some of that here in the region. Trade agreements are international agreements. There are intermediate solutions are national. It's national law that moves typically more quickly. We see that when we compare the evolution in competition law to trade law, the competition law is still being handled nationally, and we see this being modernized at a different pace. So maybe later on we can come back to this issue, how more dynamic can national law be, but you're also not happy with the EU, entirely happy with the EU law. So I expect we hear back from that about this later. I would like to say something on SMEs. When we work with SMEs in developing countries, there's a clear difference, a strong difference between those who are active players in the digital field, or those who are producers of goods or other services and who hope to sell online. SMEs that are supposed to be able to take advantage of this fantastic e-commerce, SMEs we deal with often do not even know how to put a picture online. Or they start we are being told by us, please, you have to establish your own website, and they come up with a website that looks like the screen you see there, which is something that would not attract any type of consumer. So there is, we see in the field, and maybe Satrio can come back to that, or Frederick, quite a discrepancy between these potentials that SMEs in developing countries have and the actual capacity they seem to have to develop that. But with these 2 points I just throw onto the floor, I pass over to Jovan.
Good morning. Thank you, Marion. Well, I will start with, just to make a conversation flowing and using my few minutes to develop a few ideas with Adam's reflections on the question of the oil metaphor. And yesterday over the meal with some wine, we discussed the oil metaphor, and there was one interesting question from my interlocutor. She asked me, well, Jovan, how does it happen that these companies are so rich and we don't pay for their services? Well, you're familiar how it is happening, and we came to the question of value of data. Obviously, there are, like any metaphor and any analogy, it has commonalities, it has differences. But I think what the economists, whom I still trust out of all newspapers, put the title a few months ago, Data as the Oil of the New Economy. They refer to the economic value that data brings to those who operate those companies. Therefore, I would argue, if you have a time, probably it's limited, it's not the main aim of the session, I would argue that the economist was right at this, on this point, on the value side. Okay, it's not infinite resource, and there are many, many differences. But while we're still with language, I like, Marion's, when you're mentioning World Trade Organization and then trade-off, I said we may coin the word World Trade-off Organization, and I will keep the copyright over that, or Creative Commons sign. Now back to the last point on the language. You are noticing the transcripts at the IGF, which is unique innovation of the Internet Governance Forum, which has a mixed, I would say very positive, but some people complain that, you know, in old Latin scripta, manent volant, well, what is said is flies, and what is written is kept for posterity. I'll have to refresh my Latin. And we are analyzing every day the transcripts of all sessions at the IGF. You can find them in the IGF Daily. And what we noticed after the first 2 days is that data is the keyword, the most frequently used keyword. And the second point, we noticed that shift from the language of efficiency, the blue sky, business opportunities, to the language of values. Language of trust, language of equal distribution of the dividends of digital economy. And this is the major shift comparing to the previous IGFs. We have been following the transcript for the last 11 years. And it is the major shift from the efficiency narrative to value narrative. Now, back to the concrete question, what I prepared for this presentation. We are living into the really decisive phase between, one can say, 10,000 feet, between approach where data was used for data mining, for the insights what the companies are doing, for advertising, and the shift for data as a basis of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is based on discovering patterns in data. And it is going to be the major change in the way how data is used. Therefore, this is, let's say, general framework. And then when we move and focus in, we have GDPR. What will happen on 26th of May? Why internet companies are hiring big offices in Brussels? Again, yesterday, during the one informal discussion, I was faced with the argument from one computer scientist that nobody can stop flow of data across the national border, and it's not possible. You know, the argument is that there are not borders on the internet. I'm skeptical about it, because whatever is happening from my notebook to the servers to the cables is linked and anchored in geography. Therefore, it is a bit argument which is also getting a bit tired. It has been for 12 years around. And whatever we can say technically, economically, on the 26th of May, whoever operates data of European citizens will have to know where those data are stored and how are they used. It is going to be a major challenge, as Adam indicated, probably bigger challenge for small companies, but I would say major challenge that may affect business model of big companies as well. And we should prepare for that, I would say, earthquake in digital policy, which is much bigger than millennium bug, which we experienced in 1999 and 2000, not only because of the European Union, but countries worldwide are carefully following what is happening in Brussels. And as you can see from right to be forgotten, from anti-monopoly rules, then countries, other economies, mainly G20 economies, follow the same policy. Like Indonesia introduced right to be forgotten, Korea introduced it, and the countries worldwide then follow what's going on. Therefore, we are facing quite a turbulent year ahead of us, mainly focused around data. On 10,000 feet, data is based on artificial intelligence, or more closer to the ground, how to deal with the GDPR worldwide. Therefore, this is sort of setting from the linguistic one, from World Trade Organization to the GDPR. Over to you.
Well, I was going to rather retain the earthquake terminology, and I look forward to hear more on this from Louis. You also brought two other aspects into the discussion, the value of data, and as an economist, then we ask the question, the price of data. If the data are so valuable, why do we give them away for free? And an important issue, one of market power. The theme SME, small players can take so much advantage of this is brought up in the discussion a lot, and I would actually be interested to see your statistics on this when you analyze the transcripts from this event. But the fact is that global market power in this field is amazing and maybe goes beyond what we have ever seen in terms of market power before in other markets. With this, Torbjörn, very curious to hear, to hear your view on this.
Thank you, Marion. And so I'm in charge of Untitled's work on e-commerce, ICT, and digital economy for development. And I think one of the reasons is why we're seeing this tremendous interest in the data flows and cross-border data discussion is that I think more and more people realize that we are really on the cusp of what is going to become a very different digital economy in the coming years. And we're starting to see it very much in developed countries now, but it still has a long way to go in the poorer economies. And it is, of course, very much a result of much improved computing, storage, and transmission power on the internet. And just to give a comparison here, in 1980, it cost about $400,000 to have a storage space for 1 gigabyte. Today, it costs 2 cents. So it's really an enormous change. And we're seeing this rapid growth in data traffic and internet traffic. It's expected that by 2019, internet traffic would be about 66 times greater than it was in 2005. That's just 15 years difference. Now, one of the things that we see happening here in this new digital economy is the growing role of platforms of different kinds. And these different digital platforms, they thrive on data collection. But it's not only the data collection, as was rightly pointed out, it's the analysis of this data and turning this data analysis into business opportunities of various kinds. And we see that, again, to touch upon this analogy to the oil, I agree also that it's not a good parallel, but I agree that data is a new resource to extract. And perhaps one of the more important differences between oil and data is also that a company that has a tremendous amount of oil available in the market will see the price of oil going down because there's too much supply. But if you have more data, the value of that data goes up. Because the more data, the more diverse data that you have as a company, the more you can fine-tune your algorithms, the more you can make use of it, and the more you can compete vis-a-vis those with less access to data. And as we see this being taken advantage now by some platforms like Google and Facebook that are really collecting a lot of data and using it to sell advertising space. We have other companies that are using the data to optimize the production processes, production, R&D, sales, supply chain processes, like big manufacturing firms like Rolls-Royce or Caterpillar that have these sensors all around their equipment, and they are using this real-time information to improve their competitiveness. And then you have other players like Amazon Web Services that are leveraging the flow of data by offering cloud space, cloud infrastructure, and they're basically charging through subscription. So there are different ways of monetizing this phenomenon. With the increased use of cloud computing, social media, e-commerce, Internet of Things, we just see that this will grow tremendously in advance and also through artificial intelligence. And for the users, of course, platforms are creating tremendous value, better search functions, better social networking, and so on and so forth. And they are paying by giving detailed information, data on their habits, activities, whereabouts, networks, etc., which is generating a lot of attractive intelligence, not only for businesses, but also for governments through surveillance and so on. So this raises a huge range of issues related to privacy, competition policies, consumer protection, surveillance, cybercrime, fraud, etc. And from UNCTAD's perspective, our prime concern is here that we have a huge gap here in the readiness of countries to engage in these discussions and also to prepare for this, what's coming. We have big gaps in terms of affordable ICT and cloud infrastructure between countries. We have a lack of laws and regulations to address the potential risks involved here and to facilitate the advantages that can be derived. And we have a lack of skills. So it's not only a question of collecting data, you need the skills also to make use of those data. And here there is a tremendous lack of data scientists, and this gap is particularly apparent in developing countries. And that basically puts the developing countries at a disadvantage in this area. So a few words just on what we can do in that context to try to support developing countries in preparing. We can do research and analyze what's happening, what we do in the Information Economy Report. We try to become better at providing capacity building in key areas, not least through our partnership with all the other players like Diplo, ITC, and 25 other international organizations under E-Trade for All. And also to provide meeting venues, forums for countries to come together and discuss these issues, ideally in a multi-stakeholder setting, and also where all the countries of the world are present. And two specific activities here would be the e-commerce week that is happening in April, and also the UNCTAD Intergovernmental Group of Experts on e-commerce and the digital economy. So thanks again.
Thank you, Torbjörn. And I already noticed one disadvantage of these transcripts. I have to make sure I pronounce your name correctly in order for it to be spelled correctly when it appears here. Thank you for your points, Torbjörn. I thank you for making reference to the infrastructure challenge, notably in developing countries, the legal challenges we have already mentioned, but also for mentioning the skills dimension. By talking to my adolescent daughters, realized that even though they are very active users of these new technologies, contrary to myself, who learned how to program and how to write algorithms because I was exposed to the very old-fashioned type of computers, they only know how to use these tools. They have not learned how these tools are programmed and how to be active and creative users of these tools. So skills development, definitely an important aspect. Louis' European policy has been mentioned a lot. I look forward to your points. Would like to say in this context, so that when I look at the legal texts and discussion coming out of Brussels, notably, I see a lot of WTO terminology. I see terms like Mode 1 coming up, like necessity types of tests. So there is definitely also in this area some value for the kind of legal language that has come and is coming out of the World Trade Organization. But please let us know more about this earthquake that is coming.
Yeah, thank you very much. We'll have to see if it's an earthquake or just a very slow development. But GDPR is going to have a big impact. I want to talk a little bit about my perspective as a former legislator, but also I think the perspective of the consumers when you come to this. And my political background is as a social liberal. Now, in the European context, that means something completely different than I think in an American or another kind of context. But basically, we're very much in favor of free trade and open markets, but at the same time, very strong on human rights, on data protection. And I think the two go hand in hand. And that would be, I think, is one of the key things that in any win-win solution would have to be a part of this. These two are not in some way contradictory or mutually exclusive. I think on the contrary, I think you can have incredibly strong economies and large global wealth only if you put consumer protection and protection of human rights at the forefront. And if you look at strong economies around the world, I think there's a lot of evidence for that. So I think any win-win solution, I would love to have, be able to tick that box. Now, as you can probably hear by my accent, I grew up in the US, but I'm Dutch. And so what I find very interesting in this whole discussion about data protection is that the Americans and the Europeans have a very different perspective on this. And if I'm just going to dramatize it a bit to make the point, but basically, Americans don't really care what happens to their data. They know it's being mined, it's being sold, someone's cashing in on it, they don't care. Whereas Europeans are exactly the opposite. They're like, wait, we have a different kind of history. Who has our data? What are they doing with it? Wait, governments can get their hands on it. In my country, the Netherlands, we have a new law on health data, which keeps on being blocked because we want to know who would be able to access the health data. We all know that if you have a general database, it's a small country, 17 million people, I think smaller than major Chinese towns these days, that you put all that data together and it's useful. You go to your doctor, he has the same access to the data as the hospital has. You're not going to get wrong medication. You're not, it can save lives. But the idea that someone in a hospital can simply access my data and I won't know who that person is, why they're accessing it, what the effect is, that is not going to fly with most Dutch people and actually with most Europeans. What I would like to have is I would like to have a system whereby the second anyone accesses my medical data, I want an alert on my phone. So if I'm sitting with my gynecologist and he, and it pops up and goes, oh yeah, no, it's good, that's fine. If it happens in the middle of the night and I haven't been to any medical situation, then I really want to know who's doing it and why, etc. And I will be able to trace that to the exact person who did it. So that I think is one of the other solutions, that if people are reassured that whoever is accessing their data is doing it for a valid reason and that I'm informed when that happens, then that, it maybe sound complicated, but that way people will be much more relaxed about doing it. Now, when you come to the new General Data Protection Regulation, that is going to be, it's already in force, but it's going to be applied from May, and there will be major fines. I know there's a lot of, it's causing a lot of waves around the world. It was set up to solve an internal European problem. The 28 member states had different data protection regimes, and that was complicated for our businesses. And so we thought, well, let's see if that can be solved in some way by having some harmony there. And then, of course, the discussion went to, well, what about if the data is owned outside of the EU? And that's why we now have a system where basically the law will have extraterritorial effect, because if you have data on any European data subject, you have to comply with this law. And it doesn't matter if you're running an e-commerce shop in China, it doesn't matter if you put your offices in the US, but it works that way. So I think this is going to be fascinating to see what kind of effect this has, because the data protection standards are very high. Even for European standards, they're very high, and everyone will have to comply with it, or they could be fined. And I totally understand your point, Adam, that it's complex. Everyone in Europe is still figuring out how it works. So I can just imagine if you're, a three-man company sitting somewhere in Idaho, how are you going to figure that? Yes, that will be very complicated, and we will figure it out along the way. But I have a pretty good idea the European Commission is not going to go for the three guys in Idaho. When they start finding, I think they're going to grab, one of the big ones with a huge turnover, because that has benefits all around. But I think the consumer aspect has to be taken into account here, and I want to use my last minutes for that. As a consumer, I find everything that's happening with data both terrifying and thrilling at the same time. The terrifying aspect is that if I want to do anything, I have to click accept. I don't know what I'm agreeing to. Nobody reads those things, and the people that do, there's nothing you can do about it. I want to use all those products. I want to work with these companies. I love the innovation. I love the disruption. I cannot live without my TripAdvisor, my Booking, my Uber, and all these kind of things. So I want that to keep going. That is one thing I think consumers want and adore, and that's why they constantly click on accept and agree to all kinds of things. What is terrifying about it is that you don't know what happens with it. So, now, the way that we can keep on having all these benefits, and I think that the new challenges will be even more exciting because, with artificial intelligence coming up, we're going to have better medical help. We're going to be able to take care of the elderly. We're going to make sure that certain jobs are going to be done in a way that it opens up more free time and more wealth for all of us. If we want to keep harnessing this, I think what needs to happen is that we have to make sure it's not some kind of Wild West in which people feel scared, because that's when the politicians wake up. Politicians don't go out making laws to make people's lives complicated. They hear a cry from society. They hear that people are worried, that there are concerns, they see that there is abuse, that there are problems, and then they feel they have to come in. And what's happening now, I feel, is a reaction to the initial Wild West that there was, and then somebody feels like the sheriff has to come in and set things in order. Maybe an overreaction, maybe not, but that's what you get. So my advice, especially to the private sector representatives here, is rather than enjoying the Wild West and profiting from that to a maximum, why don't you already start thinking about what the backlash will be? Think about what the consumers need. Think about the other aspects, because if you don't self-regulate, you're just inviting governments to come in and do it for you. And in my experience, and this is where I'm more of a liberal, I would rather have good, effective self-regulation and addressing consumers' needs rather than having governments come in either heavy-handedly doing something, or in this case, having one region come in and doing one thing, having other regions come in and doing another thing, and who knows when the world is going to get together and actually set some kind of global standard, which would be ideal for businesses, but it may not happen, so you're going to be dealing with, on a global level, what we were dealing with in the EU for a long time, 28 different regimes. If you're a global business, you're dealing with, 180 different regimes? So this would really be my plea. There is no contradiction between effective open markets that have prosperity for all of us and strong consumer protection and data protection and human rights. But make sure that you take them into account as you develop your products, your economies, because otherwise you're just inviting regulation in, and that is not, I think, what most people want.
Thank you very much, Louise. Thank you very much for putting the emphasis on consumers. To come back to the WTO narrative, when I joined the WTO in 1999, I did a search for the word consumer in existing agreements, in the existing legal text, and that word didn't appear. So if there has been one innovation of e-commerce and digital discussion in the trade context, is that in the e-commerce chapters in trade agreements, we now see the term consumer protection appearing. Personally, I definitely think this is a progress. Thank you for emphasizing the importance of consumer protection or consumer concerns to be part of the win-win solution. In the good old economics that Jovan still, thank you, believes in, we learned, I remember to have learned where information asymmetries exist, and they are all over the place in this field. Markets can disappear if consumers lose trust. They stop using the technology, so definitely helping consumers to feel safe, to trust the technologies should maybe be part of the win-win solution. And last but not least, I think a great plea to say, please use this technology that apparently can do everything to send me the information I want to have to my phone, for instance, on who accesses the data. If everything else is not complicated and can be done in this fantastic field of free data flow, then maybe let's also develop the technologies consumers are asking for. Satrio. Last intervention, you have the possibility to react to everything you heard, but also please a point of view from your country.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thank you for putting me on the spot regarding the views of developing countries. But basically, if I could just begin by giving a small profile of how Indonesia is in the digital economy. Indonesia is a big developing country. It's 260 million population. Out of that 260 million, 93.4 million are internet users, mostly from smartphones. The internet penetration has reached 52%, and online shoppers have reached 8.7 million, with e-commerce transaction value at $4.8 million. There's been a lot of hype about the Indonesian digital economy or e-commerce. We are seen as in the beginning of a boom. In 2017 alone, $3 billion of foreign investment has gone to our startups. So the potential is big. However, as a developing country, I want to give you the sobering reality. I think I've heard a lot about data, how data should be managed, the policies regarding data protection. But in developing countries, there's simply no data. I can tell you that in Indonesia, one of the main problems of the digital economy is that only 36% of the population are banked. Only 36% of the population have accounts in formal banking institutions or financial institutions. Only 23% have made or received digital payments. When you talk about SMEs, 59% of SMEs have an account at a formal financial institutions. And if you're talking about online presence, only 9% of SMEs have an online presence. So when we talk about digital economy, when we talk about data policy, what's important also is the issue of financial inclusion, particularly for developing countries. Because 36% of the population having something as simple as a bank account is a major reality check if we talk about data protection. Because for developing countries, we're not talking about protecting data. I mean, yes, that much is very important, but more importantly is how to create data. Because simply in the digital data flows in this world, most of developing countries' citizens are simply invisible. They don't exist. In Indonesia, a lot of private actor and businesses in the private market have tried to have innovations regarding this issue. For instance, if you don't have a bank account but you want to buy something online, you can go to the local convenience store, which has a big, wide distribution around the country. So you order it online, and the way you pay is to go to a cashier at this convenience store and pay in cash, and that store, or that franchise store, will pay your good for you, and then the good gets sent to your home. So basically, I would also like to stress that if you talk about data policy and digital economy, financial inclusion and digital literacy policies go hand in hand, but they're mutually reinforcing. Because, at least in Indonesia's experience, digital economy is seen as a opportunity, a transformative opportunity for our development, because they're mutually reinforcing. If the economy is getting more digitalized or becoming more online, obviously market forces will compel more citizens to feel the need to make bank accounts, for instance, or to have access to financial instruments that could be used online. Secondly, the rise of the digital economy in developing countries presents opportunities for companies to create very innovative banking methods. For instance, in Indonesia, a lot of banks are going with the idea of branchless banking through smartphones. So big banks are hiring agents in rural areas and areas where there are no branches to provide services through smartphones to just normal consumers. So despite the stark reality that, at least in Indonesia, most people don't even have access to financial services, actually the rise of ICT and digital economy provides an opportunity for innovations that will bring those citizens to be included in the financial system and the formal sector. I think those are just some of my views. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks also for bringing this topic of financial inclusion up. Indeed, in our own survey work, we do find that as possibility to conduct e-payments, in particular across borders, is a major bottleneck for SMEs, and that also in regions like Africa, where mobile payments, we hear a lot about mobile payments, but most of the payments also for e-commerce are still conducted on a cash basis. So as you also mentioned, we only have around 13 minutes left for the Q&A part of this. So I would like to propose to collect a few questions from the floor and also from online participants if there are questions, and then give the floor for a last 1 minute statement to each of the participants. So please, audience in the room, the floor is yours for questions. First questions from the WTO.
Hi, well, I'm not speaking for WTO. I think there's a lot of attempt to look and find best practice that people can draw upon. And when I think about the EU's new data proposal, I think the thing I think about is the more complex it is and the more costly it is to implement, the more it may SMEs may not find it works for them, and the more the implementation costs are for the government and the complexity. You have governments with less capacity and less humans even to do this. What do you think that there's ways that what the EU is going down could be adapted in other countries, or is there something else we need to come up with that might be easier to adapt in developing countries?
Thank you. Any further questions? Online participant. Thank you, and this gives me the opportunity to introduce Roxanne from the Diplo Foundation.
Thank you very much. So on behalf of our online participants, we have two questions. First one of them, how do you think the US Federal Communications Commission decision to end net neutrality will affect e-commerce, data flows, and trade? And the second one of them refers to the WTO rulings. To limit protectionism in other areas, the WTO relies on the work of standard-setting bodies such as Codex Alimentarius for food safety and ISO for technical barriers. Do you see an equivalent standard setter for the digital world? Thank you very much.
No, I thank those online participants for those questions. Indeed, the net neutrality theme hadn't come up yet. Good to pick this up now towards the end of the session. Any more questions from the...
Hi, my name is Faye, and I'm an intern at the Dutch mission. I'm a student. I studied GDPR, which was really relevant. But I have a reaction on Louis, because what we saw about privacy and the European spirit for more privacy, that is because of our history, because we, as Europeans during the war, for example, Germany, we didn't trust our governments anymore. So how you think that we can create more awareness for people around the world about privacy?
One last question. If not, I think we have a lot on our plate already with these, the ones we got. So the question on is what's the best trade-off between complexity, possible costs of regulation, and potential effectiveness in order to create this win-win? What will be the effect of the new decisions from the US regarding net neutrality? Again, as part of this, what is the optimal policy setting? Freedom, neutrality, market power, protection. Where are we positioned? Where do we have to? In what kind of balance do we end up? No, I'm very interested how that's written down, all this hesitation. When what?
Your accent and my accent. It's the most difficult out of the panelists.
Standard setting bodies, you mentioned the term standardization. We heard standards before by several speakers. So what's the role of standards in order to talk to each other technically or in regulations? and then the role of history and different attitudes to privacy protection. I think I give the floor back in the original order of speakers. 8 minutes, that gives you something like 1.4 minutes per speaker. Please stick to the time. I think we have to leave the room really at 10 a.m. Thanks, Adam.
All right. Well, I will do lightning round very, very quickly. Responding to some of the comments earlier, I think the financial inclusion point is excellent, and that brings up the fact that not all data is social media search engine data. Providing data that shows that you've paid your bills on time can help build credit reporting. That's not always included, so the positive financial data is very important. On GDPR, it is, I didn't say it was bad. It's polarizing, I guess would be the way to describe it. And one thing that could be done is maybe like a starter pack. So for developing economies, they could have some aspects to implement, because not only do the companies need to be trained, but the regulators do too. And they need to, they can't just jump into literally the deepest end possible. So that there's both education and capacity building for all pieces. And then I'm talking a little bit fast. On the standards point, they already do exist in the digital sector. So ISOS standards on cybersecurity that are used around the world. There's also some standards being developed around anonymization and encryption techniques that will be very useful. So those are some processes that are already underway and could possibly be scaled. How'd I do?
Great. I was trying to see how the program deals with speed and talking. I haven't figured that out yet. Jovan, floor is yours.
In addition to my accent, I will try to speak very fast. Net neutrality, one point which is very important. I benefited a lot from the internet, and I'm big fan and big pioneer in online education. When I'm bringing critical points, I'm concerned that our naivety and our sort of not tackling the issues can endanger this big innovation. Let me put this into a clear context. They're putting the things under the carpet, thinking that nothing is happening is very dangerous for the internet. Now, on the first point, brings me to the point on net neutrality. Net neutrality, obviously, I'm for net neutrality by all means, because it is enabling, it provides the traffic. But there is one problem in net neutrality, which is economic, which is not transparency in sharing the values. And telecom companies all over the world are coming and pushing and trying to get a bigger slice from the digital income pie. Let us be clear on that. This is behind their move on the net neutrality. Therefore, if we have more transparency in the economy, digital economy, and how the data is the oil of new economy, I would say that we wouldn't come to this radical situation where the core infrastructure of the internet could be endangered with the risk of dismantling net neutrality. This is the first point. Second point on privacy. Privacy exists all over the world in different contexts. African Union introduced convention which has a very interesting title, and I advise all of you to consult it. It is African Convention on Cybersecurity, Data Protection, and Economic Transactions. In the countries, on the conflict zones in Africa, the question of privacy and data protection is the question of life and death. And therefore, we have a different context in which privacy is considered. European context is specific, it's historically determined, but there are different contexts in which privacy is locally considered. Well, 2 minutes?
Okay. Well, that was 1.6 minutes. Thank you. Transparency, important point you brought up. Life and death, earthquakes. But the point also, Luz, we said before, we maybe need to think about these things deeply in order to keep the tools alive.
Are very often modest. Just one thing, we should share more Indonesian great success. Indonesia is the country with most trusted governments online in all analysis, WEF analysis, Ipsos analysis, and I'm very proud that I'm today on the panel with our Indonesian colleague.
Satrio will come back to that, but first, gosh.
You can practice until the next.
Yes,
Thank you. No, there are a lot of things that need to be said, and there's no time. I think moving forward in this area, there's no doubt that data will grow in importance. So there will be a growing need to coming to some kind of common approach in the world, because much of the data is flowing across borders. And we know that there is not a common approach right now, not even among developed countries like between the US and Europe. And I think one needs to look carefully at the different concerns of the different stakeholders, from business, from governments, from national security issues, from consumers, from others, and try to see what are the best ways of addressing these concerns without distorting trade unnecessarily. I think an issue that maybe I can throw also into the question to my Dutch colleague here is if you have looked at the European level at possible implications of the new GDPR for the ability of developing countries to export back, like outsourcing services to these countries, and does the EU have any plans for helping other countries to cope with the new rules in the European Union so that it doesn't have a negative impact on the ability of developing countries to export to the European market? Thank you.
That was a direct question to Luis, and other questions were directed to you.
Yeah. The answer is I don't know, because I don't work for the European Commission, but there's a lot of them here, so I'm sure we can find it, and I'll tweet it, and I'm sure that somebody will come up with an answer. From a historical point of view, Europeans, even though they talk a lot about wanting to help developing countries, we'd rather close off the borders, be protectionist, not share in the wealth and everything, and then are surprised when many migrants want to come and share in that wealth, and I've always made the point of either we open up the markets or we open up the borders, but you can't have it both ways. So I think Europe has a long way to go in that. But that's my personal political opinion. So I think what's interesting about some of the SMEs in the European Union dealing with GDPR is that it's going to be quite easy for them, because GDPR just basically it's all European laws. So many Dutch companies, because they comply with Dutch data protection standards, for them GDPR is a piece of cake, because they've already been complying with it for decades. So that's very relaxed. It's much more difficult if you come from a completely different jurisdiction. And I like your idea, Adam, about saying let's see if there's like a starter pack or something. I really like that idea. What I find interesting about the notion of that Europeans look at things very differently, as you were pointing out, historically also the way we relate to governments. Americans trust their government even less than Europeans do. I find that very interesting. But that has different. They don't like paying taxes. There's a strong libertarian streak. They don't come out to vote, etc. But on this, it's almost like because the data is with companies, and Americans do trust companies, that's why the divergence has come. And I think we have a difference there, and that cultural difference is very interesting. So one of my recommendations actually is let's keep talking. Let's keep talking about how these things affect different parts of the world, how they affect your part of the world, the differences between the US and Europe, and let's come up with the best standards that actually work in practice. And just to go back to the way I tried to do this in my private life in Holland, besides being on the ICANN board, I have two activities I engage in. One is I'm the board of something called Alert Online. We try to make people aware of what they do online. And the generation, I think your kids are about the same age as my kids, they are very cyber savvy, but they're totally sloppy when it comes to their data. They go on unprotected Wi-Fi, they share their password, so they have no idea what's happening with that. But to raise awareness, and we do that at a national level, we do that with different generations, we do that in organizations, that is going to be one of the key things to keep people aware of what happens to your data and how you operate online. The other part, what I do, is that I'm part of a bunch of guys who are supporting startups. So when small companies say, hey, I have a great idea, and most of them, of course, are working with data in one way or another, we try to find venture capital, we try to find investments to do that. So I think, on the one hand, making people aware of the risks, at the same time enabling the opportunities, that is the way, and we're going to be doing that at local and at national level, and then hopefully let's take those best practices, exchange them. I love your idea about that. Let's keep on exchanging them so that whatever can be leveraged either to a higher level or can just be copied in other parts of the world, let's benefit from that knowledge.
Thank you. And Satrio, best practice, apparently best practice of trusted governments, that lies with you. Again, you're put on the spot. Your closing words.
Thank you. Just to respond to the issue of standards, this is where Geneva plays such a big role for us in Indonesia. We will submit a draft bill of national privacy laws to the parliament next year. But a lot of our internet regulation actually was born in Geneva. Diplo Foundation provided a lot of reference for our internet governance standards. UNCTAD does a lot of work and provide us a lot with legal framework and regulatory inputs. So I just want to emphasize here that the role of our international friends of international organizations is very important, at least for Indonesia. Most trusted government, yes, thank you. But in my past life, I did work on the Open Government initiative. I'm not sure if everyone is aware of this, but basically it's basically a network of governments who try to emphasize the importance of the internet in terms of providing public services and accountability. Please don't mention this to my ambassador, but in terms of but I would just share to you the effect of being so-called trusted government is that, for instance, there's an app called Lapor in Indonesia, available to all Indonesian citizens. Basically, if an Indonesian citizen goes to my office and is treated badly or gets bad services, he can report directly to the president's office through this app. And by law, when the president's office forwards that complaint to my office, by law, our office has to respond. So that's just a little example of the work that it takes to become a most trusted government online. Thank you.
Of the disadvantages of all these technologies, thanks to technology, it will now be also known to the world that I have problems to pronounce Torbjörn's name. I thank the panel for this very interesting discussion. I look forward to staying in touch. Those of you who are based in Geneva and who want to learn more about this and related topics, consider enrolling for the just-in-time course on digital commerce that some of us here will be organizing starting on January 29th. So it's organized by the Geneva Internet Platform, COTS, ITC, Diplo Foundation, and UNCTAD. So maybe I can see some of you there in the near future. But before you enroll and before you leave the room, please join me in thanking the panelists for this interesting discussion.
Good morning. We're just waiting for the remote participation and the webcast to be ready, and we will be starting very soon. This is quite uncomfortable. Good morning. Welcome to the workshop 38 about international cooperation between CERTs, technical diplomacy for cybersecurity. And note that this is a question, so we are here to explore whether CERT cooperation is or not a form of diplomacy. Let me give you a bit of background. My name is Pablo. I work for EPINIC. EPINIC is the regional internet registry for Asia Pacific. We serve as the IPv4, IPv6 address registry of around 16,000 networks, and our aim is to support internet development in Asia Pacific and to promote an open, stable, and secure internet. We are part of the technical community, and our voice is mostly the voice of network operators.